really is an honor to be here. Such a beautiful venue, and to be following the other horsemen. It really is. It's great to be here. Now, I'm going to speak tonight about the delusion of free will. And to my surprise, this is an incredibly sensitive subject. It's perhaps the most sensitive subject I have had the honor to touch. It's sensitive to religious people, of course, because without free will, Judaism, Christianity, Islam don't make any sense, if you can imagine such a thing. But the existence of free will is actually a very sensitive topic for atheists as well, because it seems to touch everything human beings care about. It seems to touch everything, in fact, that makes us distinctly human. Morality and law and politics and religion and intimate relationships, feelings of personal accomplishment, feelings of guilt and responsibility. It seems that most of what we care about in human life depends upon our being able to view other people like ourselves as being the actual conscious source of their thoughts and actions. So in this talk, I hope to do two things. I hope to convince you that free will is an illusion, and I hope to convince you also that this matters, and those are quite distinct. And I want to begin, I hope on not too defensive a note, by telling you the two most common ways of misunderstanding my argument. And this is sort of like beginning a marriage proposal by saying, here are the two most common reasons women haven't wanted to marry me, and why they were wrong. Now, the first way of missing the point is to think that we simply don't understand enough. Science is incomplete. Some of our scientific assumptions may be false. There may be truths to discover about the nature of the universe that would put free will, the popular notion of free will, on some new footing. So it's simply too soon to say scientifically that free will is an illusion. This is not true. I am arguing that free will as a concept is so incoherent that it can't be mapped onto any conceivable reality. The second detour you might be tempted to take, as many have, is to say, well, of course, the popular notion of free will doesn't make any sense, it doesn't fit the facts, but none of that matters. That's an academic argument. We still feel free. This changes nothing. It's sort of like saying that atoms are mostly empty space. This is not empty space we can use. Nothing about our life changes. Everything is mostly empty space, but I still can't fit into an old pair of pants. Many people agree that free will doesn't make any sense and that it's some kind of illusion, but they think that nothing important changes, and that also, on my view, is untrue. Imagine you're taking a nap in the botanical garden next door. I don't know if that's legal or not, but just imagine you do it. And you are awakened by an unfamiliar sound, and you open your eyes and you see a large crocodile about to seize your face in its jaws. Stranger things have probably happened. It should be easy enough to see that you have a problem. Okay? And now swap the crocodile for a man holding an axe. The problem changes in some interesting ways, but the sudden emergence of free will in the brain of your attacker is not one of them. But imagine the difference between these two experiences. Let's say you survive your ordeal, and you have it's a terrifying experience. Let's say you're injured. Let's say you lose a hand. Okay, now imagine confronting your human attacker on the witness stand during his trial. Okay, if you're like most people, you are going to feel feelings of hatred that could be so intense as to constitute a further trauma. Okay, you might spend years of your life fantasizing about this person's death, how much time are you going to spend hating the crocodile? I mean, you might even go to the zoo to take your friends and family to the zoo for fun just to look at him. You'd say, that is the beast that almost killed me. Well, you might be pointing with this hand. I mean, which state of mind would you rather have? Now, I think this idea of free will largely accounts for the difference. The crocodile was just being a crocodile. I mean, what else was a crocodile going to do coming upon you napping in the park? But this idea that the human had free will and could have done otherwise and should have done otherwise has very different consequences. Now, most people imagine that a belief in free will is necessary for morality. Morality has to be grounded in this idea, and it's necessary, therefore, for getting most of what we want out of life. And I think that's clearly untrue. The difference between happiness and suffering exists with or without free will. I mean, I no more want to be eaten by a crocodile than I want to be killed by a man with an axe. These are both very good things to avoid. Okay? And we can avoid them, and we can talk about almost everything else we want in life without suffering any obvious illusions about the origins of human behavior. Now, the popular conception of free will seems to rest on two assumptions. Okay? The first is that each of us was free to think and act differently than we did in the past. You chose A, but you could have chosen B. You became a policeman, but you could have become a firefighter. You ordered chocolate, but you could have ordered vanilla. It certainly seems to most of us that this is the world we're living in. Now, the second assumption is that you are the conscious source of your thoughts and actions. You feel that you want to move, and then you move. Your conscious desires and intentions and thoughts that precede your actions seem to be their true origin. The conscious part of you that is experiencing your inner life is actually the author of your inner life and your subsequent behavior. Now, unfortunately, we know that both of these assumptions are false. The first problem is that we live in a world of cause and effect. Everything that could possibly constitute your will is either the product of a long chain of prior causes, and you're not responsible for them, or it's the product of randomness, and you're not responsible for that, obviously, or it's some combination of the two. And however you turn this dial between the iron law of determinism and mere randomness, free will makes no more sense. I mean, what does it mean to say that a person acted of his own free will? Okay, it must mean that he could have consciously done otherwise. Not based on random influences over which he had no control, but because he, as the conscious author of his thoughts and actions, could have thought and acted in other ways. Now, the problem is that no one has ever described a way in which mental and physical events could arise that makes sense of this claim. I mean, consider you're a generic murderer. Okay, his choice to commit his last murder was preceded by a long series of prior causes, a certain pattern of electrochemical activity in his brain, which was the product of prior causes, some combination of bad genes and the developmental effects of an unhappy childhood, whatever influences were impinging upon him the day he committed his crime. The moment we catch sight of this stream of causes that precede any conscious experience and reach back into childhood and beyond, or beyond the person's skin into the world, the sense of his culpability disappears. That the place where we would place our blame disappears. To say that he could have done otherwise is really to say he would have been in a different universe had he been in a different universe, or that he would have been a different person had he been a different person. Now, and as disturbing as I might find such a person's behavior, I have to admit that if I were to trade places with him, atom for atom, I would be him. And I would behave exactly as he did. And for the same reasons. There's no extra part of me that could resist the impulse to victimize innocent people. I mean, even if you believe that every human being harbors an immortal soul, this problem of responsibility remains. I cannot take credit for the fact that I don't have the soul of a psychopath. If I had truly been in this person's shoes, if I had an identical brain or an identical soul in an identical state, I would have behaved exactly as he did. So the role of luck in our lives appears decisive. One has to be very unlucky to have the mind and brain or soul of a psychopath. But the moral significance of luck is very difficult to admit. It seems to completely destabilize us. We seem not to know how to think about evil in this context. And yet in specific cases, we have already changed our view of evil. Whenever we see the cause of someone's behavior, when we see, for instance, that a murderer had a brain tumor, and the brain tumor was in just such a place in the brain so as to explain his violent impulses, that person suddenly becomes a victim of biology. Our moral intuitions shift utterly. Now, I'm arguing that a brain tumor is just a special case of physical events giving rise to thoughts and actions. If we fully understood the neurophysiology of any murderer's brain, it would be as exculpatory as finding a tumor in it. If we could see how the wrong genes were being relentlessly transcribed, if we could see how his early life experience had sculpted the microstructure of his brain in just such a way as to give rise to violent impulses, the whole conception of placing blame on him would erode. Now, of course, this is a problem that scientists and philosophers are aware of, and many think they have put forward a notion of free will that can withstand the facts. And I'll deal with some of that. There appears to be a poltergeist in this computer. But I want to argue for a moment that the problem of free will is actually deeper than the problem of cause and effect. I mean, most people think we have this experience of free will, and simply we can't map it on to physical reality. I think this is an illusion. The free will doesn't even correspond to a subjective fact about ourselves. And if you pay close attention to your experience, you can see this. Your thoughts simply appear in consciousness, very much like my words. What are you going to think next? What am I going to say next? I could start just wondering about why we don't eat owls. Why don't we eat owls? They seem perfectly good. Where did that come from? Well, as far as you're concerned, it came out of nowhere. Right? But the same thing happens in the privacy of your own mind. It's happening right now. You've all made an effort to be here tonight, presumably because you wanted to hear what I had to say about free will. And you're trying to listen to me, but you have a voice in your head that just says things. Haven't you noticed? Now, I'm standing up here trying to reason with you, and you'll think, he looks a little like Ben Stiller. I was hoping I didn't look that much like Ben Stiller. Thoughts just emerge in consciousness. Okay, we are not authoring them. We can't think them, we can't choose them before we think them. That would require that we think them before we think them. If you can't control your next thought, and you don't know what it's going to be until it appears, where is your freedom of will? Now, at this moment, some of you are thinking, what the hell is he talking about? Here's what I'm talking about. You didn't choose that thought either. If you're confused by what I'm saying, you didn't create that state. Conversely, if you understand what I'm saying and you find it interesting, you didn't create that either. Everything is just happening. And that includes your thoughts and intentions and desires and your most deliberate efforts. We will come back to that point. Now, of course, in a sense, our brains, do think our thoughts before we think them. And they think many things that we never hear about. We're conscious of only a tiny fraction of what goes on in our minds. And we continually notice changes in our experience, in thoughts and intentions and moods and resulting behavior. But we are utterly unaware of the neurophysiological changes that produce those changes. I mean, consider the sensation of touching your finger to your nose. Okay, feel free to try this. It seems simultaneous. It seems like the nose touches the finger at the same time the finger touches the nose. Okay, and while it may be simultaneous in the world, we know at the level of the brain the timing has to be different. It simply takes longer for the input from the fingertip to reach sensory cortex than it does from the nose. And this is true no matter how short your arms or long your nose. So the experience of the present moment, even of the simplest sensation, is built upon layers of unconscious processing that we're not aware of. Okay, so even the apparently simple conscious events are not entirely what they seem. The present moment is, in some sense, already a memory that is being buffered. Now, needless to say, this unconscious machinery produces not only our perceptions, but our thoughts, intentions, actions, decisions. And this is where the notion of free will and moral responsibility begin to get squeezed. Now, many people have demonstrated in a lab, in many labs actually, that a person's conscious decision comes after processes that can be detected. And there's a time lag between the moment you think you've decided to do something and the moment at which your brain decided. And this has been proven. Benjamin Libet did this with EEG, and this has been done with fMRI, and actually direct recordings from the cortices of patients about to undergo surgery. We know that even the simplest, most apparently voluntary decision, like the decision to move your left hand versus your right hand, or the decision to push the left button or the right button, when you put people in this paradigm and you have them watch a clock, a special clock that allows them to discriminate just very fine increments of time, and you ask them simply to make the choice to move whenever they want to, they can move their left hand or their right hand, just notice what time it was on the clock when you finally were aware of which course you were going to take. We know that some moments, half a second, sometimes as much as 5 seconds, before a person is consciously aware of what they're going to do, we can see in the brain what they were committed to doing. So the experience of deciding is, during this period where you still feel that you are free to do anything you want, has already been determined by the state of your brain. So needless to say, this time lag is very difficult to reconcile with free will, because in principle it would allow someone to predict what you're going to do while you still think you're making up your mind. But the truth is that even if there were no time lag, even if the conscious intention were truly simultaneous with the neurophysiological underpinnings, there would still be no room for free will, because you still wouldn't know why it is you do what you do in that moment. And again, you can notice this fact about yourself directly. Well, let's run a little experiment. Think of a film, any film, it doesn't matter, a good one, a bad one, and notice what your conscious process of selection is like. Notice first that this is as free a decision as you're ever going to get. I mean, you have all the films in the world to choose from, and I've simply said, pick one. Does everybody have a film? I'm sorry to say you've all picked the wrong film, so don't ask me how I know that, but I do. Do it again. Pick another film and just be sensitive to what the experience is like. Do you see any evidence for free will there? Let's look for it. First, if it's not here, it's not anywhere, so we better be able to find it here. First, let's rule out all of those films whose names you don't know and which you haven't seen and which you couldn't have possibly thought of if your life depended on it. Okay, there's no freedom in that, obviously. But then there are all these other films which you're perfectly aware of, but which simply didn't come to consciousness. You absolutely know that The Wizard of Oz is a film, but you just didn't think of The Wizard of Oz. Now think about this. Were you free to choose that which did not occur to you to choose? For whatever reason, your Wizard of Oz circuits were not primed in such a way as to deliver it as a possibility. Of course, if you did think of The Wizard of Oz, you should consider yourself a genius. Okay, so you probably thought of several films. And let's say you thought of Lawrence of Arabia and Avatar and Mad Max. Okay, so you kind of converged on those three, and then you thought, well, I'm Australian, I'll go with Mad Max. And then you thought, no, Mel Gibson is more than a little creepy at this point in his life. So I'm going to go with Avatar. Okay? And you settled on Avatar. Well, you still don't know why you chose Avatar over Lawrence of Arabia. And this is the sort of decision that motivates the idea of free will. You go back and forth between two options, and you're not suffering any obvious constraints from the external world or any coercion. It just, you appear to be doing all of it. It's just you and your thoughts. But when you look closely, it is a mystery why you chose one over the other. And you might have a story to tell about it. You might say, well, I saw an animated movie last week, and Avatar's animated, so I remembered that, and so I just went with Avatar. Okay, well, the first thing to say is that we know that those sorts of explanations are almost always wrong. When you bring people into the lab and manipulate their decisions, they always have a story about why they did what they did, and it never bears any relationship to what actually influenced them. So you can bring people into the lab and give them a hot beverage as opposed to a cold one to hold in their hands and get them to cooperate more or to like one person more than another, and they have no idea that the temperature of the cup in their hands is influencing them at all. The psychology is just bursting with evidence of that kind. But even if you're right in this case, even if the memory of the animated film was the thing that steered you to Avatar over Lawrence of Arabia, you still can't explain why it had that effect. Why didn't it have the opposite effect? Why didn't you think, well, I just saw an animated film, so I'm going to go with something else. I'll go with Lawrence of Arabia. The thing to notice about this is that you, the conscious witness of your inner life, isn't making these decisions. All you can do is witness these decisions. I mean, you no more picked a film in the subjective sense than you would have if I picked it for you. I could have been saying Star Wars, Hannah and Her Sisters. These names were just appearing in consciousness. There was this first moment where I said, pick a film, and nothing had happened, and then all of a sudden, the names of films started coming to you. And you didn't know which they would be until they appeared. So I'm arguing to you that our experience in life is actually totally compatible with the truth of determinism. We don't have this robust sense of free will the moment we actually pay attention to how thoughts and intentions arise. And again, it's important to notice that this is true whether or not we have immortal souls. I mean, the case I'm building against free will does not presuppose philosophical materialism. I'm not the idea that reality is just entirely physical. No doubt, most of reality is entirely physical, and most of mind is produced by physical changes in our brains. We know that the brain is a physical system that's entirely beholden to the laws of nature. But even if we have souls that are somehow loosely integrated with the brain, the unconscious operation of a soul grants you no more free will than the unconscious neurophysiology of your brain does. If you don't know what your soul is going to do next, you are not in control of your soul. And this is rather starkly obvious when you think of all of the people who do things they wish they hadn't done. I mean, think of the millions of Christians whose souls just happen to be gay. But it's true even when you do exactly what you wish you had done. In hindsight, the soul that allows you to stay on your diet is just as mysterious as the soul that tempts you to eat cherry pie for breakfast. Okay, so I think it's safe to say that no one has ever argued for the existence of free will because it holds such promise as an abstract idea. The endurance of this problem in science and philosophy is the result of this feeling that most of us have, that we freely author our thoughts and actions. And at the moment, the only philosophically respectable way to defend free will is to adopt a view in academic philosophy that's called compatibilism, and to argue that free will is compatible with the truth of determinism. Now, my friend Dan Dennett the philosopher, is a compatibilist, and he essentially makes the claim that we just have to think about free will differently. If a murderer commits his crime based on his desire to kill, and not based on some other thing that's hijacking him, but his actions are actually an expression of his real desires and intentions, well, then that's all the free will you need. But from both a moral and scientific point of view, this seems to miss the point. But where is the freedom in doing what one wants when one's desires are the product of prior events that one is completely unaware of and had no hand in creating? So from my point of view, compatibilism is a little like saying a puppet is free as long as it loves its strings. Now, compatibilists push back here. They say that even if our desires and thoughts and behavior are the product of unconscious causes, that doesn't matter, because you are the totality of what goes on inside your brain and body. So your unconscious mental life is just as much you, and your unconscious neurophysiology is just as much you as your conscious inner life is. Okay, but this, to my eyes, seems like a bait and switch. Okay, this trades a psychological fact, this experience we have of consciously authoring our thoughts and actions, for a general conception of ourselves as persons. It's a little like saying you are made of stardust, okay, which you are, but you don't feel like stardust. Okay, and the knowledge that you're a stardust is not driving your moral intuitions and influencing our our system of criminal justice. The fact is that most people are identified with a certain channel of information in their conscious minds. They feel that they are in control, they are the source, and this is an illusion. The you that you take yourself to be in this present moment isn't in control of anything. So compatibilists try to save free will by saying you're more than this. You are the totality of what goes on inside your brain and body. But you're making decisions right now with organs other than your brain. But you don't feel responsible for these decisions. Are you making red blood cells right now? Your body is doing this, hopefully. But if it were to stop, you wouldn't be responsible for this. You would be the victim of this change. So to say that you are responsible or are identical to everything that goes on inside your brain and body is to make a claim about you that bears absolutely no relationship to the experience of conscious authorship and subjectivity that has made free will a problem for philosophy in the first place. So what does this all mean? Well, first, let me tell you what it doesn't mean. To talk about determinism as a fact is not to argue for fatalism. Okay, this confusion on this point gives rise to questions like, well, if everything is determined, why should I do anything? Why not just sit back and see what happens? Why not just throw the oars out of the boat and just drift through life? Okay, this misses the point. This is not to sit back and see what happens is itself a choice which has its own consequences. It's also very hard to do. Just try to stay in bed all day waiting for something to happen. Okay, you'll soon feel a very strong urge to get up and do something. And the only way to stay in bed at that point will be to resist this urge. Doing nothing actually becomes much harder than doing something after a very short time. So the fact that our choices and decisions and efforts depend upon prior causes doesn't mean that they're not important. If I hadn't decided to write a book about free will, it wouldn't have written itself. You can't write a book by accident. Okay, so effort and discipline and intention, all of this matters. Goals. These are all causal states of the brain, and they lead to behaviors, and behaviors lead to outcomes in the world. So on one level, not much changes. The choices we make in life are as important as fanciers of free will imagine. And then, therefore, fatalism is untrue. The idea that the future is going to be what it's going to be regardless of what you think and do, that is untrue. That's clearly untrue. But the next thing you think and do is going to come out of a wilderness of prior causes which you, the conscious witness of your inner life, cannot see and did not bring into being. You have not built your mind. And in the moments where you seem to build it, when you make an effort to learn something, when you try to perfect a skill, the only tools at your disposal are those that you've inherited from moments past. No one picks their parents or the society into which they were born. No one picks the moment in history where they arrive. No one determines how their nervous system gets shaped from the moment of conception onward. So you are no more responsible for the structure of your brain, as well as its functional states, as you are for your height. But I'm not saying that you can just blame your parents for every bad thing that happens to you and make no effort to change yourself. This is a way of misunderstanding the argument. It is possible to change. In fact, viewing yourself as a system open to myriad influences actually makes change seem more possible. I mean, you are by no means condemned to be the person you were yesterday. In fact, you can't be that person. The self is not a stable entity. It is a process. But it is a fundamentally mysterious process. I mean, none of us know how we arrived at this moment in our lives. There is actually a mystery here in the present moment that doesn't get eradicated even though you have a story to tell about why you think you did something. We are in each moment simply discovering what our life is. Now, this may sound scary to some of you, but it actually can be quite freeing to view the world this way. So, our choices matter, and there are paths toward making wiser ones. There's no telling how much a good conversation could change you, or how much it might matter to you to surround yourself with smart people or to get an education. But you don't choose to choose what you choose in life. There's a regress that always ends in darkness. You have to take a first step or a last one for reasons that are bound to remain inscrutable. And to declare your freedom in this context is really just a way of saying, I don't know why I did that, but I didn't mind doing it, and I'd be willing to do it again. Now, I don't mean to belabor the point, but people have a really hard time understanding this. Just think of the context in which you are going to make your next decision. Whatever it is, a decision of any size, whether to get married or not, to go to graduate school or not, to eat at the Chinese restaurant or the Italian one, your brain is making choices based upon beliefs and intentions and states that have been hammered into it over a lifetime. Your physical development is something you had no hand in. You didn't pick your parents, you didn't pick your genes, you didn't pick any of the influences that shaped your neurophysiology. You didn't pick your soul, if you have one. And yet this totality of influences and states will be the thing that produces your next decision. Yet, yes, you are free to do whatever you want, but where do your desires come from? Okay, so let's get back to this issue that I raised at the beginning of this talk. It seems that this kind of talk begins to undermine a sense of moral order. And in fact, this is the position of the Supreme Court of the United States. It has said that free will is just a non-starter in terms of our criminal justice system. It is a universal and persistent assumption. That's a quote of our criminal justice system. And determinism is incompatible with the underlying precepts of our approach to justice. So the idea is actually doing work in our world. The problem is that if we view people as neuronal weather patterns, it seems to undermine a basis for placing blame. Now, I think this is actually a false assumption. I think we can have a very strong sense of morality and an effective criminal justice system without lying to ourselves about the causes of human behavior. So what do we condemn most in people, morally and legally? It's the conscious intention to do harm. Now, why is the conscious intention to harm people so blameworthy? Well, consciousness is the context in which all the qualities of our minds seem activated. The consciousness is where our beliefs and desires and prejudices rub up against one another. What you do on the basis of conscious premeditation tends to say the most about you and about what you're likely to do in the future. Now, if you decide to kill your neighbor after weeks of deliberation and library research and debate with your friends, well, then killing your neighbor really says a lot about you. That really is the sort of person you are. The point is not that you are the sole independent cause of your behavior. The point is, for whatever reason, you have the mind of a murderer. Okay, you're not ultimately responsible for the fact that you have that mind. No more so than a crocodile is responsible for the fact that it's a crocodile. But a crocodile really is a crocodile, and it really will eat you. Okay, if you see one out on the boardwalk tonight, it's worth taking seriously. You don't have to attribute free will to it to take it seriously. Now, certain criminals are obviously more dangerous than crocodiles, and we have to lock them up to keep everyone else safe. Now, the moral justification for this is entirely straightforward. Everyone is better off that way. And that still makes sense without free will. What doesn't make sense is the motive of retribution, the motive of punishing someone because they deserve it. That begins to not make sense. We don't punish crocodiles because they deserve it. In fact, that hasn't always been true. It says in Exodus that if an ox gores a person and kills him or her, the ox has to be stoned to death, and its meat can't be eaten. And in fact, for hundreds of years in medieval Europe, Christians held trials for animals that harm people. These animals were actually defended by lawyers. Okay, there are cases of, there's a case of, I just read about, of a lawyer who was representing a large collection of rats that had destroyed a crop. And his argument to the magistrate was the rats couldn't appear in court because there were so many cats about that were going to do them mischief. So his client was absent. Okay, this went on for hundreds of years. We've lynched. The latest lynching of an animal in the United States was in 1916, where an elephant ran amok out of a traveling circus, trampled someone in the street, and the good people of Tennessee decided to lynch it to get justice. They hung an elephant from a railroad crane, and they were quite satisfied with themselves. So you can see that, I mean, those facts are macabre and comical now. You can see how we're prone to illusions on this front. Now, I'm not ruling out the possibility that certain punishments may be necessary to regulate people's behavior. It may be that certain crimes require punishment in order to be deterred. But that is a purely pragmatic discussion about human psychology and the causal efficacy of punishment. It has nothing to do with retribution. Dispensing with the illusion of free will allows us to focus on things that actually matter, like mitigating harm, deterring crime, assessing risk. So I'm not arguing that everyone's not guilty by reason of insanity. The bad people need to be locked up if that's all we can do to keep ourselves safe. And all the distinctions we care about, the difference between voluntary and involuntary action, or the moral responsibilities of an adult versus those of a child, all of those can be conserved without this notion of free will. In the United States, we have 13-year-olds serving life sentences for crimes. I don't know if this happens in Australia, but this happens in the U.S., and it's not based on any kind of sane assessment that these children cannot be rehabilitated. It is based on the sense that they deserve this punishment. They are the true cause, the sole cause of their behavior, which was so heinous that they deserve this as a matter of retribution. That doesn't make sense when you relax this notion of free will. I mean, the thing you have to admit in the final analysis is that even the most terrifying people are at bottom unlucky to be who they are. And that has moral significance. And once again, even if you think everyone harbors an eternal soul, the game doesn't change. Anyone who's been born with the soul of a psychopath is profoundly unlucky. You take one of the most odious people I can think of, Saddam Hussein's eldest son, Uday Hussein. He really is somebody it's almost impossible to feel compassion for this man when you think of him as he was as a man. I mean, this was somebody who, when he would see a wedding in progress in Baghdad, would descend with his thuggish bodyguards and rape the bride. Sometimes he would rape and kill the bride. He did this more than once. Okay, so given that we couldn't capture him during the course of that war, whatever you think about the ethics of the war, it was good that we killed him. I mean, unless you are a total pacifist, you have to admit that this is what guns are for, to shoot people like Uday Hussein. Okay, but simply walk back the timeline of his life. Think of him as a 4-year-old boy. Okay, he might have been his psychopathy might have been evident even at the age of 4. He might have been a scary boy, but he was also a very unlucky boy. I mean, he had Saddam Hussein as a father. How unlucky can you get? Okay, he was the 4-year-old boy who was going to become the psychopath Uday Hussein, through no fault of his own, ultimately. If at any point in his life course we could have intervened to help him, at 4, at 5, at 6, at 7, at 8, that would have been the right thing to do, and compassion would have been the right motive. So the irony is, if you want to be like Jesus and love your enemies, or at least not hate them, one way into that is to view human behavior through the lens of a wider scientific picture of causation. Now, I'm not saying that it would be easy to adopt this perspective if you or someone close to you was the victim of a violent crime. This is how we need to see the world in our more dispassionate moments. But our dispassionate moments are the source of our thinking about public policy and scientific truth. To see how fully our moral intuitions should shift, imagine if we had a cure for evil. Imagine that we understand exactly what psychopathy and all its variants are, and we can make the necessary changes in the brain painlessly and safely and easily. We can just drop the cure into the milk like vitamin D. Okay, so now, at that point, evil is a nutritional deficiency. Now, imagine the logic, the moral logic, of withholding the cure for evil from someone as a punishment for their evil acts. But would it make any sense at all to say, well, no, this person was so evil, he was so bad, he caused so much harm, that he shouldn't be given the cure? Does that make any sense at all? Imagine withholding surgery from someone who has a brain tumor as a punishment when you are sure that the brain tumor was the cause of their violent behavior. Now, to my eye, that makes no sense at all, and that reveals that this urge for retribution is actually born of not seeing the causes of human behavior. When you see the causes, if we could trace the causes in a fine-grained way, this notion of vengeance and this notion that people deserve what they get in this way as punishment would disappear. And this leads me finally to the subject of religion, because of course the notion of God's justice is entirely a matter of retribution. People deserve what they get because based on their own free will they are misbehaving. I mean, this is the religious answer to the problem of evil. When you say, well, how did an omnipotent and omnibenevolent God allow the Nazis to kill millions of people? The answer is, well, human beings are endowed with free will, and therefore God couldn't control that part. Now, obviously, that's not an answer to all the other mayhem that's born of other causes. So tsunamis and epidemic disease, an omnipotent God seems responsible for those things. But the religious answer to the problem of human evil is free will. Free will is what makes sense of the idea of sin, this idea that people can consciously, as the sole cause of their behavior and belief, turn away from God. I must be the sole sufficient cause of my unbelief. Okay, this can't be true. Not only can this not be true, because beliefs are born of all of these prior causes. I can't actually be the cause of my unbelief. It seems impossible to describe a universe in which it could be true. And however you tune the variables of determinism and randomness, free will doesn't put in an appearance. There's no mix of randomness and determinism that gets you free will. Now, ironically, one of the fears that religious people have is that this way of viewing the world dehumanizes us. But rather, I think it humanizes us. What could be more dehumanizing than to say that most people throughout human history are in some crucial way responsible for the fact that they were born at the wrong time, to the wrong parents, given the wrong beliefs, given the wrong religion, the wrong intellectual influences, and as a result of that, they deserve to be punished for eternity. And the God that designed this diabolical apparatus is somehow still good. So to conclude, I just want to bring this back to the direct experience of consciousness in the present moment. It's generally argued that free will presents us with a compelling mystery. We have this robust experience of freedom, and yet we can't figure out how to map it onto physical reality. I'm arguing that's not the case. I think this is a symptom of our confusion. The illusion of free will, on my account, is itself an illusion. There is no illusion of free will. Thoughts and intentions simply arise. What else could they do? Now, some of you might think this sounds depressing, but it's actually incredibly freeing to see life this way. It does take something away from life. What it takes away from life is an egocentric view of life. Now, we're not truly separate. We are linked to one another. We are linked to the world. We are linked to our past and to history. And what we do actually matters. Because of that linkage, because of the permeability, because of the fact that we can't be the true locus of responsibility. That's what makes it all matter. So you can't take credit for your talents, but it really matters if you use them. You can't really be blamed for your weaknesses and your failings, but it matters if you correct them. Pride and shame don't make a lot of sense in the final analysis, but they were no fun anyway. These are isolating emotions. But what does make sense are things like compassion and love. Caring about well-being makes sense. Trying to maximize your well-being and the well-being of others makes sense. There is still a difference between suffering and happiness, and love consists in wanting those we love to be happy. All of that still makes sense without free will. And of course, nothing that I've said makes social and political freedom any less valuable. Having a gun to your head is still a problem worth rectifying wherever intentions come from. So the freedom to do what one wants is still precious. But the idea that we as conscious beings are deeply responsible for what we want, I think needs to be revised. It just can't be mapped on to reality, neither objective nor subjective. And if we're going to be guided by reality, rather than by the fantasy lives of our ancestors, I think our view of ourselves needs to change. Thank you very much.